So, dear friends, shall we begin? Good evening to everyone. I'm Angelina Davidova. I'm the moderator of this seminar, so I'm glad to see the organizers here and today's speakers and our guests. So today we have a reason, sad and happy. Happy because we are looking forward to a very interesting presentation of a research related to the wind energy in Russia and the first experience of energy cooperatives, and sad because it's our last activity so far in the cycle of discussions under the heading the Fair Energy for the Future. And I will remind you that we have had 3 discussions. At the first discussion, we have touched upon the issues of vistas of development of the renewable energy sector in Central Asia and the Caucasus on the whole. And we've looked into how the sector develops in this region and what achievements we have, what difficulties there are, and what could be changed. And our second discussion, we discussed the climatic risk issues for the population of the aforementioned countries, and also the issues of and question of how we can adapt to these climatic risks. At our third activity, we discussed the vistas of green growth and green restoration of the economies and what could have been done. I remind you that the recordings of all the previous activities are available at the website of Ebert Foundation. And before we move on to today's activity, I would like to make a few important announcements. For the first, this activity will be interpreted, and many speakers will talk not in the Russian language. So if you require interpretation, please find translation button. It has a sign of a planet, so press it and choose the necessary language. If you want to listen to this in Russian, choose broadcasting in Russia. And if you are watching us online, so the function of interpretation is behind the vertical 3 dots, either in the right, upper right, or lower right corner. As guests of the activity, you have an opportunity to ask questions to the speakers and to the commenters. Please write your questions in the chat. Or in questions and answers, and we will see them and we'll be able to respond either in writing or orally. So one more time, welcome again. Today's is the final discussion for the fair, the experience of the first energy cooperatives, and this activity is organized by representatives of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in Russia. So as a welcome address, I would like to give the virtual mic to the head of Friedrich Ebert Foundation, to Pierre. Okay, instead of Pierre, we would have Lisa Gert, who is also a representative of the foundation in the Russian Federation. So thank you very much, dear Angelina. Thanks for the welcome address and for the technical information. I'm going to repeat the same things in German. So if you want to hear the German translation, you will find the globe on and press the button. Thanks for your presentation. And it's said that it's our 4th activity from the cycle. And in the last 3 activities, we managed to discuss very interesting topics, and Angelina mentioned them. This is the energy efficiency and the social dimension and the growth and many other things. And honestly, I liked to see a lot of reviews after the activities when the participants were quite active and were asking questions and were involved in the discussion. And it's nice to discuss not only the technical dimension, but also some social topics like healthcare, workplaces, the effects of climate on the economy, what chances are for Russia because of the changes that are already happening. So today, Tatiana Lanshina will present the results of her research, which was conducted by a number of partners. Stefan Zenker is the Secretary General of the World Wind Energy Association, will also give his comments. And after today's activity, you could possibly see all the recordings at the website of our foundation. You could see the potential of the wind energy in the Russian Federation and how this potential is going to be used or not. And so I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion. And this time we managed to find very interesting speakers, and I'm not going to take your time and just give them the floor to the speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lisa. For the next welcome address, I would like to give the virtual mic to Matthias Dörner. He represents the economy and science section in the embassy of Germany in Moscow. Thank you very much, Mrs. Davidova. It's very pleasant for me to be invited to this activity. Why I'm so glad is that I have come to Russia. I came to Russia 2 years ago, and 2 years ago on my table, there were the results of the research that Friedrich Ebert Foundation was conducting in the sphere of wind energy. And since I am dealing with the topic of energy quite intensively in the embassy, and it's pleasant that we are talking not only about the oil and the natural gas, because these are the topics that come up, because within Russia, they are all popular, and I'm also dealing with these things here. But since I am thinking long-term, I understand that it's also important to talk about renewable energy sources like wind energy. And Russia, I think, has a big potential which could be used even with more benefit than the potential of the oil and gas resources. Because we are talking that it's not like we're talking not about 100 years of the resources of fossil fuels, but only like tens of years. And in terms of the potential, in terms of wind energy, Russia probably has the biggest potential in the world. And Germany, of course, as an importer of energy resources, is interested more than others that Russia would realize and use its potential. And I've been trying in the last couple of years to start talking about wind energy with my vis-a-vis, but in most cases, as a response, I heard some skeptical remarks. Something like it's like very expensive, or it's not reliable source of energy because the wind is either going or not going. And besides, wind energy is very difficult to use in the regions where the temperatures are very low because the blades freeze over and stop working. But I've had a lot of talks with my partners and colleagues in Russia. And again, I keep saying that wind energy is a big chance for Russia because Russia has this potential. And this also signifies that there is potential for Germany, which is going to be growing because now Germany imports a lot of gas from Russia and has to import lots of oil from other countries. And I think if Russia would generate wind energy, it would positively influence the economic relations between Russia and Germany. Now, I have also heard from the Minister of Energy of the Russian Federation that Russia has the biggest potential in terms of wind energy. This is good, and the more people know about Russian potential in this sphere, it's the better. And the more we have results that would substantiate this with practical data, it's going to be even better. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion. So I would like to give the floor to Tatiana Lanshina, and I met her several years ago at one of the first big conferences devoted to the development of the renewable energy sources in Skolkovo. And I think then we couldn't even dream that such activities about renewable energy sources would be in such numbers as they're going now. So the interest has increased, the number of experts have increased, and the first interesting practices have come into being. And so now this topic is becoming more important and probably a little bit fashionable. Whether I'm right or wrong, Tatiana will tell us and the further commenters. And I would like to introduce with my great happiness Tatiana Lanshina, the Senior Research Associate of the Ecology Modeling and Ecology, Tatiana of the Russian Academy of State Service. So what's happening in Russia, where we could see the wind farms, whether we are going to have more wind farms, and how far it's possible to create an energy cooperative and install wind generators at the backyard. And is anyone doing this already? Thank you very much, Angelina. Indeed, several years ago, it would be very difficult to imagine that in Russia there would be the first facilities of renewable energy, and they are going to work, and it's going to happen so fast. But still, like 3-4 years have passed when we were waiting, and they couldn't wait for this to happen. And now we have dozens of big solar power stations and also wind farms. These are modern wind farms with high capacity installations, just like in the rest of the world are being built. I will start the presentation. I will show and tell you about what's going on in the sphere of wind energy in Russia. So in our research, we try to look at what Russia managed to achieve in the last couple of years, what Russia managed to build, what kind of equipment we started to produce. And secondly, we've looked into the regulation in the renewable energy sources. The regulation keeps changing very fast, and we have new segments that are subject to regulation. And like quite recently, there were some rules adopted on the generation of energy, and now the households and people and small enterprises can start supplying energy into the grid based on the law on energy generation. Well, small energy facilities are not quite popular both in Russia and the world. Of course, some people install them, but I wouldn't say that they are a big and prospective market. So in this respect, small wind farms are not looked upon and into in our research, and so, but we've looked into other big segments of the energy market. Of course, we paid a lot of attention to the wholesale market of electric energy and capacity. This is explained that this market is developing mainly in Russia, and now we have like big wind farms and have big figures on which we could look. Secondly, we looked into retail market of electric energy. So far, we have only a few projects. There are some perspectives and vistas, but it's very difficult here. But still, retail markets are also important. I'm going to explain why a little bit later on, why we have to pay attention to them. And we also looked into isolated territories. They are related to retail markets, but they are kind of set off because they have specified conditions like northern territories or remote areas where it's difficult in terms of logistics and climate. So special attention was given to the economics of wind energy and the economy of renewable energy sources. And in Russia, it drives a lot of debate, and people believe that renewable energy is expensive. This is not so. And I'm going to show you some figures and will explain why renewable energy is not so expensive even in Russia. And probably the most interesting part of our research are the prospective niches for wind energy in Russia. So we wanted to look into directly generation of energy and production of equipment, but also looking a little bit broader, because now as the technologies are developing, it's becoming more and more important. All kinds of inter-industry project, and energy is becoming more than just the energy science. So at this slide, you see how many wind farms were planned to be built and how much were actually built. We see that in 2015, we planned the first wind farms. It didn't happen because we had quite high requirements for the installation and production of equipment, so we had to postpone these plans. But in 2018, there was the first wind farm commissioned and brought into operation, 35 megawatts in the Ulyanovskaya Oblast. And then in 2019, we had one more wind farm with 50 megawatts capacity. And then came 2020, and here there were like gigantic capacities installed, 715 megawatts. Of course, for the rest of the world, it's just a drop in the ocean. It's a very small figure, but still for Russia, where we haven't had such big wind farms before, it was an achievement. And further on, we expect that this plan in light green, it is going to be fulfilled by 2024. Some facilities were delayed, but they will be still built with some delay. But it's expected that the volume to be implemented at the whole market would be implemented. So if we look at what wind energy has a place in the Russian energy sector, it's not a big place. As you see from this diagram, wind energy is only 0.4% of the installed capacities of all power stations, power plants in Russia. With other renewable sources, the situation is roughly the same. In terms of solar power plants, it's slightly higher, 0.7%. But the solar plus wind power plants is just a little bit over 1% of the installed capacity. The share of the wind in this generation is 0.13% at the beginning of this year. And as compared to other countries, this is, of course, catastrophically small. And on the average in the world, the solar and wind power plants is more than 10%. Actually, 10% was in 2020. Now it's much more than that. In European countries, at the expense of solar and wind energy, there are much more than 10%, like in the US. In the EU, it's over 21%. In Germany, it's 42%. In Great Britain, it's 33%. So we can see that Russia is lagging behind, not only in terms of wind power, but also in other fields of renewable energy sources. It's a big drawback, but on the other hand, Russia has big potential, has time and place to grow and what to develop in the incoming years. Here you see the map of wind energy facilities, dark blue, these are the regions with some wind farms. And in gray, we see the regions where there will be some wind farms built. So I will tell you the big dark blue regions are in Siberia and in the Far East. Of course, the wind farms are very small in number, like in isolated areas, and their capacity is not very high. And the main wind farms are in the European part of Russia. This is explained by the fact that the European part has a concentration of population and industry, the main consumer, the main demand for the electric energy, and also it's quite convenient in terms of logistics, especially in the high and low middle Volga region. It's very easy to transport the equipment. We have all the infrastructure for this, and we have a very good wind potential. It's not maximal, but still it's quite usable for big wind farms. Apart from building wind farms, equipment for wind energy was localized in Russia. And the main purpose of supporting the wind farms in Russia was the production. Developing modern equipment and production lines. So we see three groups of companies where they've built new facilities or plants or developed within the existing facilities. So this is a group of companies of which Fortum is part, and then also secondly it's Rosanda, where have new wind that deals with wind power. And the third group of companies is Enel. The Siemens Gamesa is the technological partner. The first two groups of companies have implemented the first wind farm projects and the foundation for the development of wind energy. And Fortum first they built the first wind farm in the Ulyanovsk region, and then Nova Wind had the first projects in last year, and Enel finished their first wind farm in Russia, and presently they're going to commission it. So in Russia, there are lots of obstacles and barriers for wind energy. And now it's not the happy time for discussing wind energy, because now they are discussing the volumes of the second support program of wind renewable energy sources, and they are going to be very small volumes, not enough for the good development. But a lot of things are happening in the world, and renewable energy sources are going to grow at a high rate, and of course it will have an effect on Russia. And no matter what resistance is in Russia to developing new renewable energy sources, the economy shows that renewable energy is becoming more and more beneficial, and the needs of international clients and partners are also telling us that we have to move on to onto new renewable energy sources. Maybe it doesn't look optimistic now, but we can expect many barriers to be eliminated in Russia or overcome. So the main barrier is that so far we haven't had understanding how to implement all this potential of wind power. And for this reason, they are not planning to approve or to adopt big support for wind energy, for wind power, and it's going to be like 400 billion rubles from 2025 to 2035. This would allow to build about 7.5 gigawatts of wind power plants and about 4.5 gigawatts for wind energy. And 4.5 gigawatt is the minimal volume which is necessary for wind power sector to keep afloat all the three companies in Russia I spoke about earlier. And to fully load these three companies, they need more than 5 gigawatts of wind power stations, best 13 gigawatts. And of course, the potential in Russia is much bigger in terms of wind power, and we have to speak about not only technical but also economic potential. It's much higher than 13 gigawatts. A big obstacle is the lack of climate agenda in the country. Of course, formally they are there, and in 2020 they've been discussed a lot. Maybe they haven't been discussed more than last year, but so far you cannot say that ecology and climate change movements are of any priority at the state level in our country. In terms of crisis that we are all in, the crisis related to the pandemic, I have to say a couple of words. In the world, this crisis, on the one hand, postponed some of energy projects. There were problems with logistics, with technicians traveling from countries and other regions, but it made all the people rethink The development strategies in many countries, many international organizations have come to understanding that they have to go out of the crisis by supporting green sectors and renewable energy sources. So in Russia, we so far haven't had such understanding, and crisis affecting negatively because we have the opinion prevailing in the state and at the federal level. It's best to support the most suffering from the pandemic sectors, and we are having less and fewer opportunities to develop renewable energy sources. Nevertheless, we have some factors that will facilitate the development of wind power development in Russia. So in the world, last year we saw the main economies to become more carbon neutral. In many cases, the plans for this were just declarations. In many cases, there are no decisions behind them at the state level, but nevertheless, these plans, these declarations, they give a clear signal to the investors where they could, within the next years and dozens of years, to invest. And so a very important role is played the risk of trans-border carbon tax on behalf of the EU. And this factor stimulates companies to think towards green energy. And a very important role is the decrease of the costs of renewable energy sources, especially the wind power. Not all people in Russia know that renewable energy has become less expensive, and so energy in the last 10 years have decreased in price by 10 times and wind power by 3 times. And sooner or later, Russia will learn about this, and I hope the sooner the better. And mainly, the next important factor is Russia has the biggest potential for wind energy. And the estimates that we have in our country by a group of research from the Higher School of Economics and from many other institutes, from the Moscow State University. Several years ago, they assessed the energy potential. In Russia, it increases by 17 times the consumption of energy. The potential for wind power is huge. Now let's move on to the economy. How much wind power generation costs in Russia? So there have been several attempts to have such appraisals, like the Council of the Market. They tried to check the price, to assess the price, and they believe that it's like 10 to 12 rubles. However, the Association of the Development of Renewable Energy, last year they had 6 rubles. And International Energy Agency, they've analyzed several projects in the Russian energy sector, and they had 5 to 7 rubles in Russia. So we had the figure of, for the wind power, 6.4 rubles. We are within the trend and within the results from our colleagues, and most likely wind power is probably from 5 to 7 rubles in terms of costs. What's interesting from the economy? So our colleagues from Arve and from Weber Consulting, when they check the price for the energy sector, they also evaluated the cost of generation from other sources of energy, and they have come to the conclusion that if now we have a right to choose between the wind power and coal power plant, so it's in Russia, it's cheaper to build a wind power plant by 2030. It would be cheaper to build a new wind power plant rather than gas turbine power plant. So for Russia, it's very important that the wind energy and wind power sector is becoming competitive. So we got 6.4 rubles in Russia. It's about 2 times higher than on the average in the world. So wind power energy sector is competitive, but still it's more expensive than in the world. So we have to bring the price down. How can we do this? So we've identified several ways and how to do this. First, it would be good to have big volumes for the capacity supply agreements. It's not realistic right at this moment. Maybe next year they are going to be increased or reconfirmed. But still, in Russia, we have to have a big local market for wind power for us to produce the equipment at world prices, at a lower prices than they are producing now, and so that we could start exporting this equipment. Because without this, it's all futile. You cannot just you can't just develop some production and start exporting. Secondly, it would be good to increase the competitiveness. Now we have 3 players on this market, and if we had low volumes of capacity supply agreements, it could be just 1 or 2 players on the market, and there will be no competition. To prevent this situation, apart from big volumes, you have to either cancel the localization requirements or opening this Russian market to foreign players. It sounds fantastic, and nobody is going to take these steps, but still these are probably the only options to increase the competitiveness at our market of wind energy. The alternatives of it are canceling the requirements for CUF. It could increase competition. It would open the market for smaller players, not only like big companies, like smaller companies could come here and build their wind farms here. And a big problem is the cost of capital. It's not only a characteristic of for wind power sector, but to bring the price of the cost of capital by involving institutional investors. This is a popular decision in many other countries, and in Russia, this could work and resolve this problem. And of course, we could note, and we have to note, that CSA and the tenders are not the best option in terms of governmental support. Like green tariffs were discussed, but it was like 10 years ago, and it was decided to go along the non-green tariffs and tenders. And of course, now it's a bit too late. Talking about green tariffs, that it could possibly be more stimulating for the market, but still the experience from other markets that selections and tenders at markets with low competition are not the best solution for developing the renewable energy sector. And coming back to the last part of our research, the most interesting one, where we tried to find the prospective niches for wind power generation in Russia. The traditional, of course, is the production of equipment and electric energy for local market. Well, it's probably clear we can't have big hopes on the fact that Russia would manage to develop big wind energy and big volumes of equipment. So these hopes are not justified right at this moment. But nevertheless, some market will be here, and if we had some small volumes for the future years, maybe in several years these volumes would be extended because the world is going along a different way as compared to Russia, and solar power and wind power are growing like by 10% each year. And sooner or later, this will affect us, of course. And in Russia, we could have the production of medium capacity, like less than 1 megawatt plants. So what we have is the components for wind energy for bigger capacity, for more than 1 megawatt power plants. And we have the need to have small wind power plants. They could be used in isolated territories if they are adapted to the conditions of these territories. And high winds, as a rule, it's either the north or the extreme north. And it's big. There are big problems with logistics. So small wind power plants with several hundred kilowatt could be in high demand. And this experience could be used not only in Russia, but also in other countries. There are lots of isolated territories in other countries, not necessarily in the north, in like places with better climate, and the competencies of Russia that could be developed. They could be quite in high demand. So this is also a potential for export. And also small wind power plants could be in demand at retail markets, for example, in energy deficient areas where there are some small settlements or small towns where they don't require like big wind farms, only like small, several megawatts. And medium range capacities could be also used in the wholesale market if we cancel the CUF or decrease it. So such power plants could give even a lower price as per kilowatt per hour than we have now. They cost cheaper and they generate less, but they are less expensive. And another dimension is offshore wind power sector. It's doubtful because many colleagues believe that there is no point in developing the offshore wind power sector. There aren't many good areas for that, but we have a big number of territories on the mainland where we have good potential for the winds, and probably it would be expedient to develop this on the mainland and then start thinking about offshore areas. And so the offshore energy is a little bit more expensive than the mainland. There are many arguments why it's not worth doing this, but of course there are many arguments in favor of offshore wind power, because now it's developing in the world and its cost is decreasing faster than the cost of the mainland wind power sector. And in many countries, there are lots of hopes for that. And in terms of developing the competences and possibly for developing these competencies for further exporting them, it would be worth looking at this sector too. And then, of course, we would have to develop some internal market, local market, if we want to produce something for this sector. But so far, we don't hear talking about this, and our CSI agreements are only talking about mainland wind power plants. Another dimension is relating to the carbon neutral state transition. It's the production of the green commodities. And in Russia, they're talking about green hydrogen. At the official level, all these plans and strategies that are existent, they only relate to hydrogen. There's nothing about green hydrogen, but still, it's quite clear that in the world, in Europe, it will be green hydrogen be in demand, which is produced with new capacities built specifically to produce green hydrogen. And in Russia, there is point to produce such hydrogen with a view of exporting it. And this could substitute the traditional resources that Russia is exporting now, and the demand for which in the future years is going to decrease. So apart from hydrogen, it's worth talking about other commodities like green metals, green cement, and so on and so forth. So these are the commodities that could be produced with renewable energy sources and wind power in particular. Another dimension is the active energy complexes. These are the complexes where there is some different sources of generation, wind power. They have also some accumulating devices, and the producers of energy and the users of energy could exchange energy and also supply the energy to the grid. So any projects, any experiments that include not only wind energy and accumulation of energy would be expedient, because we have very few competences in terms of saving capacity, and we would need these competences within the years to come. The next export of clean energy, it could be worthwhile to use not far from borders from the EU. And we have to think of building wind farms and within the foreseeable future start exporting clean energy, clean electric energy. A big topic is the cooperative demand. This topic started to be discussed some years ago, but in recent years we have managed to move forward on this. In Russia, there are plants that belong to international companies, and they want to transit into clean energy and renewable energy sources. Russian companies are not keen on that, on using renewable energy sources, but still there is such at least some demand, at least at level of discussion. And so what tools do we have in terms of cooperative demand? There are green certificates, IREX standards. Our association launched them last year in Russia. There are direct agreements on the wholesale market. They've been in operation for about 2 years. And in theory, direct contracts on the retail market are possible. It hasn't been tested so far, but we have great hopes that within the next years, it's also going to be launched. And finally, we have opportunities for building corporate wind farms. Of course, situation is slightly more difficult than with solar power plants, because solar power plants could be scaled and built in any. It could be a small.
It would be gigantic, and with wind farms, it's a little bit more complex. And if you talk about large wind farms, which being built now in Russia, and in the case of there is a corporate, if there is corporate demand, then corporate demand has to be joined into certain pools. So there will be certain companies, a number of companies, maybe to get a pool together, and they will be having a large demand for a large wind farm, and then we have to develop the production for small wind power plants and build wind farms out of these machines, and they will be smaller in scale. They will fit better for the corporate segment then. And then one of the ideas here is a green special economic zone. There are 36 special economic zones in Russia, and this is an interesting subject. It is quite popular. In nearest years in Russia, Russia will have to match the green standards of its partners, its neighboring countries, and maybe it would be worth to introduce not only a tax breaks here, but in these economic zones, probably the connection to green energy would be provided. So there is no this power in Russia. This subject that we touched upon in our research, and we think that this precedent will occur, and there is no impediment for the energy cooperatives, power cooperatives there. So there's this precedent, there's the first project. We need to see the precedent, so we need to find a group of households or companies who would be ready to implement this project. So this is it for me. I will be more than happy to answer questions. So this is, I'm done. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tatiana, for the introduction of this research. I think this was rather nice, very deep work here. Then the trends that it's monitoring that have already happened, that will be happening, and we'll see this view into the future. And where these future markets, where do we go from here? So is it a cause to be optimistic or not? Well, thank you very much, Tatiana. Friends, I see that in chat there are questions where we find this research and the presentation, and also in the chat there is answer there where it's in Russian and in English. Please come use these links and you can download it and study it. And so let's move on. And now there are some expert comments. And first, I want to give the stage to Valery Seleznев, first deputy chairman of the Committee of the State Duma on Power Generation. So, Valery, please. Well, good evening. Yeah, it's already evening. You have this good tradition to work in the evening. So This is more than compensatory the quality of the keynotes, and I want to say some kind words to the speakers and to those who are preparing this keynote, because it's full of information, and I just stressed these moments that were very important, because this it covered all these points that were of great interest to me. And when I looked at the agenda, the experience of first energy co-ops, first power co-ops, and thought maybe I don't know something, because these power co-ops exist, and I hope that they exist, and then they don't. And from all the experts, they said, no, we don't know. We don't know what they're going to be talking about. When the next batches, sessions, discussions will happen. So these co-ops, these green co-ops probably will occur. And I'm quite, I was in discomfort listening to this keynote. Well, I do have, do I have 5 minutes? Yes, of course, you do have 5 minutes, easy. And I think that there is something artificial in these kinds of keynotes when there is this critique of the lack of climate change and eco agenda in Russia. And well, so I do it as well. And yes, I sometimes say that this agenda doesn't exist in Russia. But at the same time, everything is done on. This is this mechanism. Is not a marketing mechanism. So these contracts for the power supply. So this is inside this non-market mechanism. So there is this small support. It's just a very little support. This is 400 billion for 10 years. This is and this kind of squeezing it out. This may lead to the situation when there are 3 players that we have. There will be 2 or just 1, and there will be a monopoly. And on the one hand, it is a very interesting thought. Then this is an artificial squeezing out these contracts, and because when we wait for a little time, quite a short time, so 5-10 years time planning, then we probably we will take a dominating position in the area in Russia with this huge wind potential, and I think this is very attractive, and I call the spade a spade. And dear colleagues, on the other hand, I think we have to understand here. So this the foundation, for instance, these deeply respected experts, this is the development of market mechanism or for the support of non-market mechanism. What has a future? What has a better future in the strategy of the development of wind power in Russia? And the critique of the lack of the actual strategy when they don't know even where to move, whether we move in the market. Is it the wholesale or retail? Is it the isolated areas where it's economically viable, or where, first of all, do it in the areas where there is wind power generation, when it's non-competitive totally, when it is not market mechanisms with the guaranteed return of investment, where there is more consumers, where the power supply system has all the signs of excess. But here there is a certain kind of cheating. And Fortum, I like Fortum's position, and they clearly stated when the program for the support was discussed for 20 and 21. The only people that say we don't need support, this was Fortum, and you probably remember, just do the market, and we don't need support, we don't need contracts for power supply. And I asked Fortum, what if there are contracts, are you going to refuse to proceed? And say, well, Mr. Chuvaev said, well, if there is support in that mechanism, well, of course we will support in all the mechanisms of support. Of course, we will. Business is business, money is money. And I wanted to also to stress the attention here, to draw your attention to the fact that in recent time there is quite a lot done to stimulate the development the support for the retail market. Retail market, just spend a little bit, if in 2015 there was a decree number 47 of the government on the issues of stimulating of this, and then there was a flaw there that there was no guarantees that the network company would actually sign up a contract with these power plants. And so the government decree from 2020, 1298, it corrected its situation. And now the rules in the retail market, including with the obligations of network companies to sign the contracts for the purchase of with the subject of the generation, and afterwards, and then the look at the contest, and not after the completion of the construction. So this is these networks, they don't want to connect to already built stations that will be higher. The risk will be higher, and the risks for tariffs being approved where the projects will not, it minimizes those risks too. So we could say that you can't say that nothing is done for the retail conditions there, then that would be wrong. And if we talk about the support of isolated areas, remote areas, Tatiana said in her keynote, of course, she was absolutely correct that there's all the preconditions for the market, including taking into account that the transport logistics is really, really difficult because the fuel is 1 or 2 years it takes to get the fuel in place. And so the cost would be economically viable, and it could be anything. And many projects in remote areas, they are done through the traditional commercial or governmental contracts for the supply of equipment. And here I just want to say that the governmental decree from 2019, number 46, on introduction of changes in some governmental documents on regulating prices of the tariffs of power supplies, technically isolated areas, remote areas, then not connected to unified power grid. Then the generators and energy supply companies, it gives them the opportunity within 5 years to keep the tariff power if the spending was cut on the fuel. If they transition to hybrid generation, including wind, and that economic viability and attraction is increased for the hybrid generation. And Hydra and some other companies is a good. They are a good example. So actively developing the generation in remote areas. And in summary, I just wanted to say that this is helped with the approved plan of actions for the non-effective mazout and diesel generation in hard to access remote areas, which was adopted in 2019. So there was this disclosure of information in these areas, and there was competition tender for the projects of modernization based on and here the winner will get the contract with fixed price for energy for them supplying the power, so they could actually make long-term plans for their projects. And but in principle, of course, the critique that sounded in the keynote, of course, it all exists. There is just an objective assessment of the situation, the opportunities that exist for green power generation. And in some way, I just wanted to say that we need to decide. We need to decide first of all, not with the strategy of development of, good health to you, but first of all with the strategy of development of fuel and energy complex, and with the strategy of power generation, because electric energy, because the pandemic, all these 2 years of the pandemic, they demonstrated clearly that the process of decarbonization is actually speeds up the prognosis, the predictions, which 2 years ago they just seemed totally futuristic, but they now we understand that they're real. and they're closer and closer. It's same as was happening before. That was happening with the falling prices on the wind and solar energy. Every year, the predictions are updated, and every year, these predictions are exceeded, so to say, and they're more and more optimistic they're becoming. And here we need to not miss the point of no return when in our power balance, where thanks to these these support programs and non-market mechanisms, and we have 0.13% of wind in energy balance of the country, and it's not very big. We can't develop the country, we can't develop our industry like this. And this scary thing with the trans-border jurisdiction here and taxations here, because the European Parliament has voted for the introduction for the that was the majority there, and there were some people disagreeing there, of course, countries, but of course it will involve us as well, and it will involve us much sooner than we thought before, because we were talking about 2025, then we started talking about 24, maybe 23, what's going to happen in 23, so what will be in the regulations and in law. Now we're saying that Europe is ready to start doing it from 2021, and 2021 in just in half a year's time. It's already here, and those experiments that we've done on having the carbon neutral areas in Sakhalin for following these project that was implemented, and the key problem here is the integration, of course, of those methods, those technologies that make it possible for us to have this carbon unit notion, the European, and because if there is no integration in the world, in Europe, then the price, the cost of this experiment is much undermined. And I'm so sorry to have taken so much of your time. Thank you for your comment. And I think it was most relevant. And I also wanted to point out here the fact that how often our international colleagues, the ambition of your statements, it's not, you don't hear it very often. And the assessment of international prospects for decarbonization, the green course, the green international development, and we have to do something in Russia, and we have to do things also so ambitious. And I'm so sorry I repeat the word. It's very, very nice to hear, and it's very important to hear it. I think that they started talking about it in Russia at the high political governmental levels, and I think that you and us, we will be supported in our aspirations. I just one phrase, I just want to add just one sentence here. Have a look. I have to react to this. What you blamed me for. In a good sense of the word, you put a blame on me, and if a decision is made, the manager made a decision, high and mighty managers, any transition like this, and we're talking about the transition of power consumption, the energy consumption, and it doesn't fit into any horizon of planning of just your normal manager. And here, these foundations, they play the role of these global research, global studies, global approach, global techniques, very important. We have to remember, and this is a high pathos here that I'm going to use, and I'm going to say that we are not here. We're not just renting this planet, which we will just forget afterwards. We have to pass it on to our children. And on the level of a manager, I'm not going to be thinking about, that I actually am obliged, après moi, it's just maybe the flood after us, and then they sort it out. So that's what I'd be thinking. And it's just a global thinking in those terms. It's got to be the other way around, the totally opposite way around. And it's very important. It's very important for this global thinking to reach the most, the firstest people, the highest leadership, so that they wouldn't stretch their energy balance, their type of food. So atomic energy, nuclear energy, is it green? You understand, gas, hydro, is it green? Because there's this talk that hydro, if it's more than 100 megawatt hydro, and now we let's not think it green. This is the question. So this is the issue here, and gradually, of course, we get to the point that renewables, it's wind and sun, wind and the sun, and hydrogen, for the production of which you have to have a wind and sun 10 times, dozens and times more than we have now. Valery Sergeyevich, thank you for this little comment, this addition, and it's, yes, your words. Yeah, and we're gonna carry on together, and we're gonna work on this subject and international dialogue, international collaboration. It's very important, I think, and Abbott Foundation and other international organizations that are present here in this conversation, that they get together and they would probably talk at a deep expert level, and then they would assess the trends occurring in Russia, in the world, and what we need to do and how. So let's move on. Stefan Xander, Secretary General of
Thank you very much. I am so glad to participate in this activity. I will speak in German. Usually I speak in English, but our organization is an international one. We have more than 100.
We have more than 100 country members. We're in Bonn. Our headquarters, we're not far from the UN, and it's just I'm going to be talking in German, and I'm so happy to speak German. About a year has passed from the time when I went to the business trip and away, and that was in Moscow. To Moscow I went, and there I had this opportunity to meet some colleagues who are present here at this webinar. And it's exactly then we were talking, that would be good to come up with the research, exactly the research that was presented here today. It is so wonderful that it has actually happened. And today we have the opportunity to discuss the result of this kind of research. But nevertheless, we have to say that the process on the assessment, we started a while back. The first research was published about 4 years ago. On the collaboration started about 5 years between our organization and Friedrich and Ebert Foundation. 4 years ago, we published the mentioned research on the wind power in Russia, wind energy in Russia, and it's there was quite a stir, and it was published in Russian. At least 3,000 downloads from our site of the Russian version, and I am ever so happy. Russia is a very important country, not only for wind, but also for other types of renewables. And wind energy was not presented 5 years ago in Russia. There was just a few wind farms, and I think they didn't work at the time. They weren't operational. So I'm so happy with this progress, and these years we can consider progress, and Russia has taken its proper place in the world map of wind energy. In the end of 2020, the assessment was done, and we established that that's about 740 megawatts installed power, and that is quite a growth compared to previous years. And I think it was only 90, I think, 1,000, I think, of new power generations, of new capacity installed, and you can see then that 700 is quite a hike up. And in China,
there were 50,000 megawatts of new install capacity, and that is a total. This is total for entire Germany. In the US was 17,000, and China is getting closer to 300,000. This is a totally different scale if we look at the Russian market, and we then see that Russia so far is lagging behind, but it can play in the same league as these countries too. We expected a fall in through the pandemic, but in reality, the opposite happened. There was a delay in the development, but the market was still developing quite. It was quite fast and it was quite good. And on average, now in the world, there is about 7% of energy balance is actually supplied from wind power generation. Russia, of course, Russian contribution is not out. In Germany is more than 20%, for instance, of the energy balance in total, and this is massive source of energy. And there's Uruguay, for instance, and or in Denmark, it's about 40% of wind energy there, and you can see the potential there. The potential you should expect. And one thing that we could say clearly that there exists a very clear world tendency trend towards the wind power, because there was this Paris climate treaty. Many countries decided to become climate neutral by 2010, stop using combustible fossils. So it is not only wind energy, we see the growth in solar energy, but the wind is making huge contribution within this worldwide reform of power generation. And the capacity is huge, and the investment is huge. It's massive. But what about Russia? Russia, Russia has to look at the world trends. And this is a country that traditionally actually exports power. And we've heard that beyond doubt, there are new chances for Russia in both the renewable energy it can export. But I want to stress that what we've seen during the first research that we did, first study that we did, Russia, it's where in a sphere of wind energy, it's very old tradition. Even in the USSR, this industry did exist, whereas it didn't exist anywhere else. The wind power was used in the USSR when it didn't exist anywhere else. And how do we get to the situation like that again? The Soviet Union was one of the first countries where they had the research centers for wind energy. And we could say that this sphere is not alien to Russia. It's not novel to Russia. All Russia could do is just come back to the experience that it already has. And many years ago, the governmental levels, I was communicating representatives of Russia, and of course the mood is very positive, the vibe is very positive, and the wind energy will play very important role. And of course we've analyzed the problem issues here, the pressure points internationally. When we compare the markets in Russia, the market is quite small, but for the investors, that means that the market is not quite, not very attractive for the large scale investment. So it seems to me that this is key. What Tatiana was talking about. So this is the most critical aspect, I think. And so there is this issue here of the cost of this power, and wind costs more in Russia, of course, than in other countries. We understand. We can guess why it is so. Well, of course, it's clear when the industry just when it's at an inception and investment, there is more investment needed, and then the cost will be driven down. The world prices will go down. There's a 50% of Russian prices, the world prices are on average. And in Russia, the positive point here would be to improve the competition if more companies had the opportunity to take part in these activities. Russian companies, of course, if they could work in the market, they could develop their own technologies. I think that is very important. These countries that are successful in this sphere, Germany, India, China, the US, Denmark, they all these companies, they have internal, their own inner wind power industry. These are jobs and their own developments, technologies, and it's also the reduction of cost for this type of energy for its own market. And we want this for the Russian government to open the market. We open up the market, we make it broader, we make it bigger, and we make it possible for our own company to develop their own technologies. Maybe in the beginning that will cost a little bit more, but in the long term prospect will be better because Russia will be able to develop its own industry, not depend on international suppliers of technology, but to develop it themselves. And because we have this potential in wind energy, and many times we've heard that wind potential is huge, and that very little is used of what we have in Russia. And we have the potential for growth is massive, and in solar also, and in wind power. So with this potential could be used for internal market both and for export too. And we were talking about green resource. It could be hydrogen, but it could be steel that is made at steel making plants where there are clean energy sources, and it could be exported also. And I am so happy that first steps were made towards it, and I do hope that more will happen later. And I think that this research will give the new impetus to this development of the industry. And in the end, I wanted to say that we have to think about simple folk, the citizens and the companies. Of course, they are important, but we see in Germany, for instance, that this civil energy, where people have their own power plants and they invest into their own power generation, that is developing really well. And in Russia, there is potential for the development of this in remote areas where there is no there is no good infrastructure. And in these areas, of course, that's exactly where this sphere may develop. And of course, economy may be not developed not as well as in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and people may be, thanks to wind energy, people might have to have a new source of income or to cut their power generation costs. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm ever so grateful for this very optimistic and positive keynote. And I think that our final event here today from the cycle of Fair Energy of the Future, this is becoming the most optimistic. Whether we're going to keep the vibe to the end, I don't know. Whether we're going to keep this mood. And now I give the stage a virtual microphone, because it's unfortunately it is not offline, to Olga Ukhanova, the leading expert of the Association of the Development of Renewable Energy. Olga, please.
Yes, thank you, colleagues. Good afternoon. As far as I understand, I'm closing. No, there are some comments after you. Okay, so I'll try. I have some relation to this research, and I'll try to Tatiana has given the main results, and I'll probably make some comments from our experts have something to say. I would like to start with, I would like to support this positive trend and emphasize that in such a short time, wind power has been in Russia, we have achieved quite significant results. And indeed, the volume of installation of capacities at Tatiana's traffic, in 2020, we increased 700 megawatts. It was built in just 1 year, despite pandemic, despite the restrictions for our facilities to bring in the equipment into the country, and the presence of international teams and technicians, because there are lots of international experts at commissioning. So this year for wind power sector became launch pad, and all the pilot projects played in 2017, 2018, and we were looking forward for the investors to start building the real projects. And Enel was involved, and Rosatom, and with the main facilities in the south. So the installed capacities, we have seen great growth, and probably somebody was glad, because investors are to pay fines for delays, and the fines have been accumulated, quite significant fines. And so we could be happy to be within the schedule. And the second result for the for this industry is the cost. The cost of energy from the wind. So we had several evaluations. We compared in different ways. When we want beautiful figures, of course, we take the record applications for wind farms, and also some unsuccessful applications from other generations. But if the trend keeps going on, that the wind power sector is taken at the current tenders, by 2027 and 2030, we will see the price parity in Russia. And here, I would like to say something on the comment from Valery Sergeyevich about market or non-market mechanisms. It's very interesting here, because this sector is just coming into being, and we see the experience from other countries when the industry was developing and are still developing with the support. And how can we evaluate the activities and political programs that are taken in different countries with the support to some industry, whether it's market or non-market support? So it seems to me that to set priorities and subsidize some sectors of economy is a state regulation of the market, and it's okay. And I think that for the moment in Russia, we're kind of victims of the mechanisms that we are used to, like, for example, this mechanism of capacity supply agreements, and an attempt in the new program to shift onto the one rate agreements. It's an attempt to try to shift the responsibility for the efficiency of this investment and the efficiency of the investments and technologies onto the investor. But of course, it's going to be a step towards increasing the competition and effectiveness. So the words I've heard that it's not within the market, it's with low competition. But let's have a look at how competition of these three players in this wind power sector allows us to decrease the costs. Like in 5 years, we have seen the reduction of more than by 2 times in the cost of the projects. And in terms of capex and opex, we are at almost the world level. So this is within like 5 years of implementing the programs. What does it say about? It says that for the moment, when the program existed in the shape it was adopted in 2013, it was effective. But another option is, how should it be reformatted so that we can come and achieve some new results like a parity in terms of costs and achieve the goals and aims that are placed on the new horizon, knowing that the world has changed and the technologies have changed and the climatic agenda is coming at full length. So the regulators have to be responsible for that. But again, I would like to say that the results that this energy sector has achieved, they are quite successful. And I think the further trend, despite the fact that the support could be decreasing, still the trend has to go on. So if I have to use an allegory, I have this, such an image. We have planted a tree, it has grown green, and we are trying to pull it, to grow it faster, so that it's fully fledged and competitive. But probably the second part of governmental support is of uh, capable of reaching uh, a better and more efficient and competitive industry. Coming back to Tatiana's research, I would like to emphasize the role of the regions when we talk about the regulators, the virtual regulators who are sitting behind the ministerial tables or some big companies. So we have such a stakeholder, the regions, who a lot depends on them actually, on the operational effectiveness of the projects. And I know that Tatiana talked to the regions during this research. What I would like to note, there is a big deficiency of investment in the regions. Big, the first people in the regions, they have KPIs on investment towards the region, and of course, the first interest which lies on the surface is quite obvious, is to bring investment into the region. When we talk about workplaces, tax base, and we should rather mention the industrial potential that now we have like 10 plants in this sphere, but they are not in all the regions. But what we have seen in the recent times, that green energy is becoming more interesting because of the climatic agenda. It's not only economic stimulus, but also investment attractiveness of the regions. What Tatiana talked about, it's this green areas, green technoparks, special economic areas. So I would like to say that positioning a region for the foreign investors is becoming important. With the support from the companies of exporters that are within this region, it's becoming to play its role. But let's not forget that probably none of the stimuli would be sufficiently implemented unless we have some rules and the institutes. And talking about the market, if we don't want non-market conditions of the CSA program, unless we have some alternative costs mechanism, we wouldn't be able to develop the sphere of RES in Russia. If we look at Europe, when they have this carbon regulation and the system for selling quotes, and each enterprise has alternative costs to pay for carbon units or to make an investment and build wind farms, it's becoming a business case. But unless we have these kind of rules, these obvious alternative costs, we are unlikely to get any market stimuli for the market players. And in closing, I would like to note several challenges that are going to face the industry within the next years. The first challenge is the geography. It's the regions that are the leaders today in terms of RES. Rostov, Ставрополь, Volgograd, Astrakhan, and the Republic of Kalmykia. They are all concentrated in the south, and now it's bringing some limitations because the generation, the statistical generation, has to be integrated into the energy system. And now we have talked about the potential of the wind power, and this potential, which is concentrated in the south, it has been exhausted. So investors will have to go into new areas. And I know that we've talked about this with Matthias a year ago at Russian Energy Week. So here the potential for technologies for research and development, you have to implement new technologies of forecasting, managing the demand. So other countries have come through this exercise. So it's going to be a challenge for investors because the support program is built in such a way that you have to be more effective. You have to bring down the costs, but on the other side, you don't have the most favorable territories for building your power plants. The next challenge is going to be the program of industrial stimulus. It's the deepening of localization, because on the horizon we are going to see higher requirements. You have to localize more components of the wind turbines, and this is indirect mechanism uh, uh, to conserve the members on the market. If we're talking about opening the market, it's quite open. The selection, any company could come to the selection committee, but through the requirement of localization, this market is indirectly limited. So only the players who have access to localized equipment really have a chance to participate in this market. And probably one of the challenges for the participants on the market will be the search for new niches. And here Tatiana's research has a lot of interesting ideas. It's the isolated territories, niches, and Vladimir Sergeyevich talked about retail markets. So a lot of work and steps have to be taken, and normative regulation is gradually adapting towards pilot projects. So we are looking forward to some new and interesting segments. So we are looking forward to developing the financing market, which makes the RES markets more expensive. It's the cost of capital and experience. Now we are going through this learning curve, and we have to learn to make investment more affordable and for the players, for the actors. So probably that's all from my side. It's interesting to see wind power in Russia. It's going to be new, it's going to be more versatile. And probably another challenge for the regulator would be to include the question about RES, probably to switch it off within the energy and industrial agenda and include it more into ecology and climatic agenda. But how to do this? Probably we will see it very soon. So we are more focused on the methodology and the capacity to devour our forests, and probably we will see the wind energy in this process too. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olga, for your comment. We are getting questions into the chat and also into the questions and answers. Please, experts, pay attention to this. And I would like to give the floor to another commenter. May I have just a little question? Okay, yeah, briefly. I heard Olga's revelation in Olga's speech, which was always in the air, but now it has been aired clearly, loudly and clearly. And literally it's there will be participants of this market, those who have access to localized equipment. So Olga has just admitted that as a support of CSA at the expense of the government, there have been some monopolists on the market of localized equipment who are not interested in selling this localized equipment to everybody, and this has all the signs of vertical integration. Why I'm asking this question? Because if I understand this correctly, and if this keeps going on, I will be the first one who will be speaking against support of RES. This is not the result that we expected. Okay, okay. You are continuing my thought. It sounded loudly and clearly that there are vertical integration, and the actors are not interested in selling this localized equipment. Well, not in all cases this is so. It cannot be in any of the cases. Otherwise, using this opportunity of this narrow and specialized audience, I don't recommend to say about this anyway, because everybody suspects that the localization is especially the conditions for limiting the competition. It's not just the opposite. So, okay, let's look into what the Ministry of Energy is saying. No limitations for participating on the market. Please come, do whatever you want, deploy your program, and it's only a condition that the state provides its support and dictate some conditions to participate in this process and fund this. So I just gave you a good piece of advice, because there are some obvious things. So, okay, dear colleagues, I call you not to make a dialogue about discussion. We are just slightly behind the schedule, but we have one commenter, Vyacheslav Sinugin, DPCO from Zarubezhneft. Good evening, and thank you very much, dear colleagues. I would like to thank Stefan for the invitation to participate in this discussion, and Tatiana for a very interesting report. And of course, I would like to congratulate all of us that really in Russia we have the backbone of this sub-industry sector, and at such a important and serious level, and it has happened within the last several years, and that's a great achievement. But from the point of view of Zarubezhneft, we are quite responsible of decarbonization agenda. I'm here more as an expert, and we are implementing a plan of reducing CO2 emissions, and we are going to extend this plan. And one of the dimension is to look into investment into wind power sector, both in Russia and abroad, among other dimensions, of course. So for 2 years, we've been working on this in the wholesale and retail market. And frankly speaking, taking into account the previous comments about the big three players, so we can't become the fourth player, but still we do not lose the enthusiasm, and we are going to work in this direction. And we are starting work with small projects for our local internal needs in terms of wind energy and power. And we are developing our competence, and of course, wholesale and retail market, and the isolated areas, of course. They are key and basic dimensions. Apart from that, we are looking into the project on green hydrogen. Today, these projects are not attractive in terms of economics, and we are interested in the dialogue with our German partners to unite our efforts to structure the most interesting and attractive projects. And quite several comments in terms of discussion um, because you have to argue a little bit in a discussion. I would like to comment several theses that were in the presentation. The first thesis is that there's no understanding of how to implement this big potential of wind power. I wouldn't agree with this thesis about the lack of understanding. I would rephrase it. There's no understanding of why we need to employ this potential, because there is no answer to this key question, and how to implement it is to my mind a bit secondary. Another thing, technical potential in terms of wind power. Of course, in Russia it's huge, but these figures for technical potential, they are quite misleading. From technical to real projects, it's a great path which is going to coming closer to the consumers through the filters of the economy of projects and limitations related to capacities. And in this respect, this thesis about big potential, technical potential, is actually requires like serious lending. Third thing, economics of the projects of wind power nowadays is much better. It's just the average temperature in the hospital. You have to be very careful about this. I can say that we've analyzed uh, about 10 financial models of wind energy, like in detail, like capex, opex, and in many cases, uh, the traditional energy sector is winning, is beating without the support from the government, even in cases when we look at wind power projects for our own needs. Another thing is the lack of climatic and environmental agenda. I think this is a bit loud statement. We know that it exists, and law on decarbonization is in the State Duma, and I agree. This is one of the elements, one of the mechanisms that has to create stimuli in work towards this. And the last point I would like to debate is the lagging behind of Russia into as compared to other countries. I categorically disagree with this, and I think we are not talking about lagging behind. We are talking about a different energy policy, and because of this policy, we have an clear explanation. And the answer to this is not like a, a concoction or a coup. It's just there are some big rational reasons why a situation is looking like this and not the other way. Maybe one of the key reasons as compared to China, for example, is that China as is the first in terms of import of oil, and Russia is the first or of suppliers of oil to the world market, to the Chinese market. And of course, the economic logics dictates that it's beneficial for China to increase of their own solar panels and to balance this, balance the oil purchases. It's a clear fact. The situation in Russia, the big energy agenda is different. The situation is different, and so such an incentive for Russian energy sector, there isn't such an incentive. And in this respect, I I would argue with this term of lagging behind of Russia. And so I'm doing this, and so I would propose to look at this as our own energy sector policy, which is being implemented in Russia, and behind which there are some rationale. And I briefly told you about. And the last thing, it's important to talk about the perspectives that was said at the end of the report about other perspective tools, and probably CSA is not the only tool. It's important thesis, and I would like to wish all of us good luck in developing all these tools and good health to all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vyacheslav.
Well, friends, of course, officially the time of our event is over, but we're gonna stay on a little bit. We've got a really highly professional, very deep discussion, very interesting, and I just want to voice a number of questions here. The first question is, what authors in Russia promote wind energy? Is there a ministry that is interesting in this sphere? Who would answer that? Any authors promoting? Yeah, I'll say a couple of words. Maybe somebody adds to what I say. Well, amongst the ministries, and there is from the Ministry of Trade, they're interested because the wind energy development in Russia, the main idea is to establish production in this sphere. And other authors, there's a number of professional associations working in trade associations working in Russia that they protect the sector in Russia and its future. Colleagues who can add. Don't forget the governors who wrote the letters letters of support. Yes, of course, the Ulyanovsk region, and there was a couple of more, Kaliningrad. These are the regions where the industrial centers are there, and the regions they don't want to lose jobs, and there's very interesting for them to implement these projects, to carry on working on this project. And yeah, I want to add a few words more. It's just Olga said about the regions, and I forgot about this in my presentation. And really, in our study, there was Ulyanovsk is a pioneer in wind energy in Russia, and the regions play a serious role in the development of energy industry, and there's huge potential in this industry, and there are new jobs to be had, and new production can be done, and new added value can be created. So thank you very much, Tatiana and Olga. The next question is, well, is a compliment. Thank you for the presentation. Wonderful presentation. Yes, thank you. Thank you all who did the keynotes and commented. And about the export of power energy from wind and solar. Is there a new working group in Russia or research study on the development of potential for export of electric energy made of wind and sun, solar and wind energy? Well, 10, 15 years ago, there was Rustech from the World Bank. There was this study, for instance. I see there is a certain confusion, and our speaker is probably not saying, yes, there is no working group like that. And what is the future? What is the prospect discussed in any way? Maybe I should reformulate the question. Yes, please, Stefan, please. Stefan, yes. Well, here, of course, we have to actually delineate export. So what do we export? Actually, first thing is the export of the equipment itself. And here, Russia wants to be actually successful. So here, you have to have your own industry, and moreover, in limited scale, of course, it is possible, of course. But the second export, this is actual power itself, so electricity itself, or hydrogen. And when we're talking about hydrogen, then now in the international market here, internationally, it is very important. There is a number of papers. In Germany, there are contracts with different countries, with Canada, with Saudi Arabia, for instance, with Morocco. And as far as I understand, there are talks with Russia too, talks on supply of hydrogen. And I want to say again, internationally, it is a very hot topic, and I don't know how these issues are going to be developing in the future, but I think these are the things that Russia should participate in. Russia is participating, and in the long term,
In long term, many people talk about the products, for instance, steel made with the use of renewable power, not fossil fuels. In the UN, in the CE, they're discussing different, for example, to raise the import tax on steel that was made with the use with CO2 emissions or some other emissions of greenhouse gas, and maybe the preference will be given to products made with use of clean energy, clean source of energy. So here, internationally, this discussion is developing. So it's in this introduction. I suggest thank you very much. Let's move on. And the next question that I want to ask and kind of send it to the broader audience. Our event is international, and it is initially Russian-German, as far as I understand, but the number, these broader experts, this is a global event here. What do you think? What kind of collaboration, cooperation in wind and renewables could be useful for Russia? So for this subject to actually to be developing. So what do you think? What comes into your mind straight away? What do you want to see in this field? Who's going to start? Who wants to start? Olga, please. Well, I did like very much the thought about that in Russia. Once it was one of the pioneering countries that started the research, the studies on wind energy. And in my view, I think that we talk a lot about the industry and the depth of localization, and we don't say enough about the actual our own research and development. And here I want to hear the new stimuli, and I want more research, I want more studies, I want more papers, and I think this is where we have potential for actual academic collaboration, scientific collaboration. There's a lot of company, there's a lot of competencies, and for instance, studying wind resources, getting all this was done with the support of naturally foreign specialists, imported specialists who were helping us to sort out these competencies. And I think it is now, the situation is that we could actually implement something in research in academia. We have a successful case of in solar with Havel, and we want to see a similar things, no less successful case in wind energy too. Thank you, Olga, Tatiana, colleagues. If you do have any more ideas. So I want to add a little bit more here. I think there's a series of studies would be good to actually collaborate. And yes, with the localization, of course, the issue has been sorted out. But Russian technologies in wind power, we don't have that, and it would be good for them to emerge in education. Of course, in education there is a certain collaboration happening with international educational establishments, and we have to broaden it. We have to train new workforce for wind energy, and like any other sector that's to do with the wind energy, the collaboration would be useful as any for any other sector. And from the point of view of the establishment of new competencies, and from the point of view of just establishing new production, new jobs. Thank you. Stefan, I see you raise your hand. Yes, please. Yes, since the international, this is an international union, you see, and international association, and for us it is that the contacts are very important, and we do have them. And I could tell you that first contacts that we actually started collaborating, that was Mr. Dmitriev from Murmansk. Unfortunately, he left us, and he was one of the first people who started collaborating in Russia, and he was a scientist. So there are traditions in collaborating with research centers, like it's happening now with St. Petersburg, for instance. And I think that in Russia there is a whole range of pioneers in this area. With Arkady Dvorkovich, for instance, we talked as well, and we represented the research, the studies, and he mentioned the issue, and he was saying that the Russian government wants to develop the international collaboration in this sphere. We tried signing new contracts, but then since Dvorkovich stopped using it and we stopped these contacts, we kind of suspended them. But nevertheless, we say there is a huge number of scientists who, with great pleasure, we do joint projects in their sphere in Russia, of course. Does anybody want to talk? Where do we develop the collaboration of Russia and Germany and European Union and other countries in wind energy and renewables altogether? What do you think? Could I? Yes, please. Yes. Well, I think that there are these finer points which where we need to focus our attention. It was done the wind and solar, and now we have to do the program on the actual power batteries, and international collaboration is necessary here because this is not exotic. So the storing the power generated. So this is the natural development of wind and power in energy technologies. So far, I don't know, and I don't see anybody who would start working on these issues, and because the size matters there, and to make massive storage like in Australia, that is wonderful, yes, but it would be better for them to be mobile, for them to be portable, and so that you can have this energy to move. So it's maybe on lithium, or they are massive, but so if they're huge, where do we take the expensive material? Because the classic storage is a TR, there's material there, but it is a very cost hungry. If it's a GS system, and of course there's a potential there, and it is being used, and if you talk the Energozapas, you can probably have heard of those accumulators. This is high heights and lifting the massive loads to heights, but this is not a solution end to end that would resolve everything. It could not be considered the world discovery. It cannot pretend to have the global results, the global solution. So here, I think we should pool our efforts, I think, with Europe. Thank you. Thank you for the comment. Well, dear friends, we've heard the whole range of ideas how to move forward. And we just sponged a lot of new information, new knowledge. We shared our opinion, and I think this was a great event. And the entire cycle was very successful. It was so concentrated. There was very deep. There was the really professional experts, very serious expert discussion and comments. It is. I'm a little bit sad that the cycle of our seminars, Fair Energy for the Future, is drawing to the close, and I think that events like this, similar or neighboring topics, they're going to be carry on, continue. Russia and Germany, Russia, European Union, and Russia, and the entire world. And a number of speakers said that all these issues, they involve our future, they involve the development of the countries, and quality of our life, and the future of the planet, the future of our children and our descendants. Friends, thank you very much. Thank you. Everybody's saying, somebody's saying danke from Berlin. Oh, it's really good that you are with us here asking questions. So you're an active participant. So, dear friends, we need to thank Tatiana for this gigantic work done, for the research, for the study done, for the presentation. So please, friends, come and read it. And thank you to all all our commentators. I think this was a very professional discussion. Unfortunately, it is not the offline format of the thing. In few months' time, we're gonna come together and meet face to face and discuss these issues even longer than Zoom make it possible, because in Zoom it's not very comfortable to be for many hours. Thank you very much to the organizers, Friedrich Ebert Foundation, our technical support. Thank you very much to our wonderful interpreters, our listeners. So friends, we keep in touch. We will be together. We will communicate. We will organize more events. So thank you all very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.